Good day, folks. We're just going to give a couple of more minutes for additional attendees to join, maybe 2 minutes. So stand by and we'll get started soon. All right, thank you for joining us. Good day and welcome to Healthcare Content in a Voice-First World. My name is Jake Damari and I'm the Director of Marketing at Connective DX. Today I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, Nate Trelor, President and Chief Operating Officer at Orbita. Nate is a respected expert and frequent speaker on the applications and evolution of conversational AI and voice and chatbot-powered virtual assistants in healthcare. He previously served in executive leadership roles at several successful high-growth software companies, including FastSearch, Microsoft, Ramp, and Ectron, where he advised hundreds of the world's largest companies and government agencies. Through the end of last year, Amazon had sold an estimated 100 million Echo smart speaker devices powered by the Alexa voice assistant technology. Google's competitor, the Google Assistant, is available on over 1 billion devices worldwide. The dramatic rise of voice assistants such as Alexa and Google Assistant, along with increasing use of other conversational virtual assistants like chatbots, has generated significant interest in healthcare circles. Organizations across the industry are looking to the power of hands-free voice and virtual healthcare assistants to increase patient engagement, education, and adherence, and improve outcomes and optimize clinical efficiencies. But like any digital experience, virtual healthcare assistants are defined by the content upon which they're built. Designing content for the unique requirements of voice and conversational user interfaces requires different approaches than other digital channels. Add to this the special terminology and other requirements unique to healthcare, and the complexities increase. In this interactive session, you'll hear about emerging case studies for voice assistants in healthcare and learn the best practices for designing, creating, managing, and optimizing healthcare content for next-generation voice and conversational experiences. Before I turn it over to Nate, I'd like to mention a few things. Attendees, you are in listen-only mode, but we are quite interested in your questions, so please submit them anytime through the GoToWebinar QA interface, and we'll have time to answer them. Questions can also be asked via the chat function. Today's session is being recorded, and all of you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording on YouTube. So once again, welcome and thanks for attending. And with that said, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Nate.
Thank you, Jake, and hi everybody. Thanks for joining today. As Jake laid out, the topic of this session is healthcare content in a voice-first world. Just by way of introduction, my name is Nate Trelor, president and one of the co-founders of Orbita. We're a software technology company working at the intersection of voice and conversational AI and healthcare. And as hopefully you'll hear as we go through the session, there are a remarkable number of opportunities and challenges and use cases related to the use of voice in healthcare. I'll spend a bit of time up front doing an introduction into why voice in healthcare, laying out the business demand for it that we're seeing, I'll talk a bit about use cases, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation, which are the peculiar requirements and considerations for content in a voice-first world in healthcare. Now, in the time we have, we won't be able to go into every possible nook and cranny of this topic, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a flavor for what are some of these unique considerations. And we'll share some resources at the very end where you can learn a little bit more about applications of voice in healthcare, and certainly about uses of content in healthcare, and then about Orbita and Connective DX. So I want to thank Jake and the Connective DX team for the opportunity to do this webinar. Before we launch in, we're going to do a little poll using the tool here from GoToMeeting. And the way it works is we're going to launch the poll. It's just asking a basic question for how far you are in your voice journey, the degree to which you started exploring voice applications in your own organization. So please take the time to select one of the following. Either you've not done anything at all, you're doing a little bit of work, you're somewhat in the process of developing voice-based applications, or you consider yourself advanced. So we'll give that a few minutes or a few seconds for you to reply, and then we'll share the results in a second. While we're doing that, just to echo what Jake said, please take advantage of the question feature in GoToMeeting. Just type your questions in at any time as they appear, and as they're topical to the where we are in the presentation. We'll maybe take a break partway through and answer those questions. If you have any other topics or questions, you can put them into the chat as well. All right, well, let's take a look at the results here. All right, so this is not to be expected, or is to be expected. Very few of you, or none of you, would consider yourself advanced in this space. It is early. Voice, despite the popularity of devices like Amazon Echo and the Alexa technology behind it, in consumer settings, in healthcare and in business, it's really just emerging. And I'll share with you, even at Orbita, a good chunk of our activity and the work that we're doing as much in chatbots as it is in voice. So one thing I want to convey here as we get into this is conversational applications, whether they're chatbot or powered through a voice application, is the broader category of applications, and the content management and content considerations do overlap, although there are some things that are unique to voice that are maybe pretty obvious, but we'll talk about them in a second. Great, well, let's continue. All right, so I've used this slide a number of times. I want to thank our partners and friends at Luminary Labs for generating this a year or two ago. It helps to frame where we see voice in the overall digital technology waves. And the best way to think about it is if you frame it into these 5 waves, or the first wave of digital disruption was the web itself, followed by the rise of search, social, mobile. We really consider voice, and more generally conversational experiences, as that 5th wave. And in the context of user experiences, content and the peculiarities of content in each of these different waves changed. So as we just take a very specific example, moving from the general web to mobile, the first blush response for most organizations to take their website and try to squeeze it down into the form factor of an iPhone. And while that served the purpose, it wasn't really a usable experience. We're really at that same juncture with voice. You can't just take a website and put it into Alexa. It doesn't work that way. So, but it does frame sort of where we are with these waves of digital disruption. Why we care about conversational age in general. One lens on this, besides all the stats you see on the right side of this picture about the adoption of voice and chat experiences generally, is the just simple adoption of smart speakers. So smart speaker penetration in that diagram in the lower left, it shows a general technology adoption rate for a number of different modern technologies, the internet, television, radio, computer. And if you layer smart speakers on top of those other technologies, the rate of adoption and the penetration of smart speakers alone, never mind how voice might be used on other devices, far exceeds the computer itself, television, even the smartphones. And that just is an indication of how quickly the population, at least in the US and developing countries, has adopted smart speakers. And then add to it all the other stats you see on the right there. Voice and conversational AI as a technology framework is here and is here to stay. The challenge we have is how do we make it work for all the different use cases that we care about, particularly in healthcare. And we care about it in healthcare because the landscape in healthcare is changing. So delivery systems are fragmented, cost is rising, and particularly in this part of the world, and consumer expectations. The consumerization of healthcare is driving quite a range of innovations. It's also allowing the consumer to take a bit more control than they have in the past over how they manage their access to healthcare. And we'll talk about access versus delivery in a second. But all of these different additional stats are informing how people are looking at digital experiences in healthcare. We like the idea of voice and chat in healthcare because it delivers very specific benefits that align with those problems on the previous slide. First of all, patients are much more empowered to take an active role in shaping their own behavior if they're interacting with a digital experience that is personalized and conversational. It's also an accessibility benefit. There are individuals who, for one reason or another, can't access traditional digital experiences like a smartphone or a tablet or even a conventional web browser-based application. Consider people are vision impaired or other mobility impaired. Power of their voice, it may be their only means of interfacing with digital technology. From the point of view of the providers, what we're trying to accomplish are better patient engagement that's going to ultimately reduce costs, but also improve outcomes. And in some cases, it improves staff productivity. So we'll look at that in the context of very specific use cases. And then there are a whole range of use cases for clinicians, which are designed to improve their workflow, give them, in some cases, a hands-free experience that can reduce their administrative burden. So there's a whole slew of benefits that we see in conversational experiences manifest in voice and chatbot. Also point out that there is an opportunity. We know that the interest in virtual healthcare assistance is on the rise. It is not 99% on the rise, but part of this is just that it's quite new. But this was the results from a study done last year around the application of virtual clinician and virtual services for consumer health. And this study is showing definite interest on the part of consumers for tapping into virtual coaching, virtual nursing, virtual clinicians, and virtual assistant to improve the way individuals access healthcare. And I like this quote from Dr. Brownstein over at Boston Children's. And we definitely see it in our space where healthcare organizations across the industry, providers, payers, pharmaceuticals, digital health technology companies are adopting voice and chat interfaces as a complement to existing traditional digital experiences. John's team over at Boston Children's in particular have been considerably innovative in their use of voice assistive technologies. First with an Alexa skill called Kids MD, which allowed parents to ask questions about the health and wellness topics for their children. And more recently with an Alexa skill that is one of the first HIPAA compliant Alexa skills for providing care to patients at home, personalized to their specific care plan. So kudos to John and his team for all the work they've done there. Just to frame voice in the context of a larger patient journey in healthcare, we divide in these applications, these use cases, into two macro categories, helping patients with access to health care and helping with the delivery of healthcare. And the delivery of healthcare may be a patient-facing experience, maybe a clinician-facing experience. So we're gonna put a little magnifying glass on these two categories. So I'll start with the simplest. On the access side, one of the earliest applications of consumer facing healthcare solutions were Alexa skills that were developed by organizations like the Mayo Clinic and Yale New Haven Hospital and Cigna, where first order of business was just to provide some health-related content. It might have been a health tip of the day, might have been a frequently asked questions knowledge base with information about how to manage your wellness generally or how to manage a particular chronic condition. Could be, in the case of a payer, enrollment support, questions about your deductible. What is a deductible? How do what coverage might you have if you have a particular plan? These basic consumer health education applications were some of the earliest ones. And when I say early, I mean things that were launched within the last 2 years. Like I said, this is a fairly new space. So information delivery through voice doesn't have a pedigree that goes back more than 3 years. Although they have been some early innovators. I mentioned Kids MD from Boston Children's. They should be on here. I neglected to include them, but they're definitely one of the early innovators. Another access-based voice experience, a little more contemporary, more emergent, our use of voice assistants to support call center enhancements. So think of it as an Amazon Alexa or other voice-powered application that can answer basic questions that a patient might have about their health and wellness, or in this example, about their coverage, and then also offer them the ability for that interface to relax to a human agent. So this is a pretty emergent but increasingly common use case that we're seeing at Orbita, where the interest is to use a virtual assistant to augment a live human call center agent. It's not so different than just basic interactive voice response systems. All of us have experienced them. You call your cable company and they would say typically, listen carefully because of our options have changed. But the priority here is to create a much more conversational virtual assistant that is contextual to the needs of the caller or the individual, but can also be delivered on these other platforms like an Echo device, et cetera. Next one is the concept of a health concierge. You'll hear this phrase come up more and more. It's becoming more common in residential care settings where a virtual assistant powered by voice delivered over a device like this one pictured here, which is an Amazon Echo Dot, can support a individual in really a home setting with basic questions like what's on the activity schedule today, or to send a message to a care coordinator, I need somebody to help me, or I can't find the TV remote. Relatively, they can range from relatively mundane requests to up to clinical care type of applications. This example here I'm highlighting was from one of our partners, Libertana, which is a residential care service out in the West Coast of the US, where they use a voice assistant to address not only just regular daily care for the residents in their settings, but also for them, they were looking at metrics like signs of indications of isolation or depression or loneliness. And it's quite compelling when you hear some of the stories of the individuals in this program where they say things like, I know Alexa is a robot, but I think of her like a friend. There are some intangible aspects of voice and voice experiences delivered over devices like this that are hard to quantify because they touch on these soft aspects of loneliness and depression, as well as the harder things like just providing support and services to patients through a hands-free voice experience. But I like the data point down below. Social isolation, according to a study done by AARP, is almost a $7 billion problem in the US alone. We can get a little more sophisticated with these access-based services like a health coach. And I'll point out that in all these applications, we will get to the content story here. There is content that's served here, right? The content may be highly custom, like in this example, where a patient is recording some piece of information about how they're doing against a care plan. And the health coach in this example is delivering a personalized response and knows the name of the individual, but also can capture that piece of information and then render some information back, a reminder about medication or a reminder about activities. And then finally, as we kind of move into more of the delivery side, we're starting to see applications where voice-first experiences have been delivered into facilities. In this case, Deloitte out of Australia, in fact, have developed a application called Deloitte Assist, which allows patients in facility, it might be in a hospital, a care ward or unit, or it could be a residential care, elder care setting, can request help. Think of it almost like the alternative to a red call button, where in the old days they might have hit a button which just sends a notification to on-call nurse with no context, no information about what the patient actually needs. So there's no ability to triage what you're delivering back. In this case, the patient can be very explicit, saying, I need help, or they can say, I need help to get to the toilet, or I'm in pain, or I need a glass of water, or I want to know what's on the dinner menu tonight. So it can be any of these things. And the nurse can triage and manage their response according to an understanding of what the actual need is. So I'm going to take a pause there just to see if there are any questions. If I can get my mouse back.
Yes, we did have a couple of questions so far. One of them is, who in the organization typically owns the voice experience in a large health system?
Yeah, well, I'll share anecdotally what we see, and it depends on the organization. But in the case of a major Midwest hospital that we work with, they have an entire team who is responsible for their content strategy and patient experience strategy. And they actually are there's two groups within one large organization. So in the case of the experience, it's the same people who own the experience for their other digital channels. So it's been a requirement for that group to come up to speed with the peculiarities of voice-first experiences. The content team that owns the content for their digital channels also owns the content for voice. So we're a platform of record for this particular organization, and they use our platform for managing the voice-first content and making sure it's synchronized with other clinical content and non-clinical content that they've developed for their digital channels. Now, that's one example. There are exceptions, right? In other organizations, it might be the application owner where there is a content specialist and experience management specialist that is oriented around that single application. So not every healthcare organization has a central function that is designed to support multiple applications, but that's changing, as I indicated with that one Midwest hospital.
Excellent. And the second question is, are there any typical challenges that innovators seeking to introduce voice and chat in healthcare face?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, is that voice is different, right? And designing an application that has a conversational agent as part of it, it requires careful thinking about what it means to design a conversation versus, say, a website navigation. So we'll talk about that in the upcoming section. But that's a key difference. Voice is not just about creating an experience where there's just a knowledge base and creating an interaction, but sometimes you'll get requests where there's ambiguity, right? I'll give you a very concrete example. Let's suppose you had a question answering application about a particular chronic condition. And it might be, what are the symptoms of diabetes, right? So that's a simple question answering service. You can handle that almost a transactional type of experience. But if they say, what are the symptoms of diabetes? And then they follow that up with, what are the treatments, right? That request, what are the treatments, is in the context of what they asked in the first round. So it doesn't say diabetes, but you have to keep track of context and be able to handle an understanding like a human would, that you know that the context is diabetes and you're going to answer in the context of diabetes. They can also do what's called context shifting or switching. Wasn't planning on going into great detail on it, but this is something that from a user experience point of view, you need to handle. So they could say, well, what are the symptoms of diabetes? And then they could say, what's on the menu today? Just to take a very left field type of switch. Those context shifts need to be handled. And you have to know that when the patient or the user's intent shifts, that your virtual assistant also has to handle that shift. So those are a couple of them. And I'll elaborate on a few others before this is done.
Excellent, thank you. That's it for now.
All right, man, let's keep plowing forward. We're about 2/3 of the way through. So let me jump back into the presentation. All right, so I'm going to highlight how voice is different across 3 different lenses. First, to point out that when you're dealing with a voice experience, it's about content for sure, but it's also about knowledge often, that in many of these voice applications, the most common requirement is to be able to answer a question, right? So in order to answer a question and serve up results, you need to think in terms of how you're managing not just content, but knowledge. And knowledge is both an understanding of answers and the questions that those answers are intended to, answer. Second thing is thinking in terms of conversation versus navigation. I talked about this already. Conversational experiences are just that. They are multi-turn, which is just a fancy way of saying, like a human would, that virtual assistant needs to be able to, interact conversationally. And then the obvious one, which I'll emphasize maybe with an example in a quick demo, is that voice is not text, right? And to deliver a voice response that maybe that corresponds with a textual response that you'd have on a smartphone is different. And so you have to think about things like, the speech synthesis and other factors. So I'll talk about that. Let's start with the first one. I like this example because it's a real use case. Mentioned Mayo Clinic before. Mayo Clinic has a lot of great digital content. You can go out to their website and search for things like how to treat a sunburn and find answers on the Mayo Clinic's website. But those answers are in the form you see on the left side of the screen. There's quite a lot of information. There might be 2-3 pages of text that answer your question. Unfortunately, in a conversational experience delivered over a voice device, like you see on the far right, which is an Amazon Echo Show, you wouldn't necessarily want to take this text and just put it into that experience. So it needs to go through a curation process. The creation process does 2 things. One is it puts that response into a form that's a little bit more ingestible or consumable. So it needs to be, for lack of better expression, shortened and made more snackable. You can't read 2 pages of text. You're going to have a short, snackable response. If they say, "How do I treat a sunburn?" you give them a crisp response, and then in the context of that question, be able to handle other questions. What are the treatments? So what are symptoms I should be concerned about? What if I have blisters? These are all variations of how a user might explore the topic. And you need to be able to have your content developed into a form of question answering. You can also do context shifting, like you see here, where they go from, "How do I treat a sunburn?" to "I feel dizzy." And you got to be able to handle that. So taking the experience on the left and moving into the right is really an exercise of understanding question answering. So question answering is a centerpiece to content management in a virtual experience, like a chatbot. It requires not a content repository, but a knowledge base made up of questions and contemplated answers or I should say it's the other way around, answers and contemplated questions. The answers are short, to the point concepts that respond or provide answers to a general set of questions. These can be seeded from query logs. They can come from patient service requests. They can come from an existing FAQ or any variety of other sources. Ingesting those requires some mixture of natural language processing and with maybe applied machine learning, as well as curation and oversight. And I want to emphasize that point because in healthcare, while we all love the promise of AI, in most cases, the answer to a question like, how do I treat a sunburn, or what are the symptoms of diabetes, is a pretty well established and clinically vetted answer. And in the case of our clients working in the healthcare space, they don't necessarily want to rely solely on machine learning to generate that answer. They do want to have some curatorial oversight into what is the right answer for those kind of questions. They want to use machine learning and other more advanced techniques to offer streamlined ways to generate those answers, but they're not relying solely on machine learning to figure it out, if that makes sense. What they end up with, though, is with these tuned questions and answers, is that it becomes their content intellectual property unto itself. So the fact that is spicy food bad for you has a particular curated response, that combination of questions and appropriate answers is the knowledge base and becomes IP unto itself. The way we manage this in our own platform is something that we call Orbita Answers. It's exemplified in a little screenshot here, but what I'll point out is that this knowledge base is made up of facts. So it's more than just content, it's facts that create a relationship between topics and some piece of content that's going to attach to that topic. It's a very simplified view of it here, but to kind of boil it down, a topic is a subject for a question. So it could be, the overall subject might be diabetes, heartburn, it might be a restaurant or a menu, to take a more generic example. And with a topic, we also want to create a relationship and extract a relationship. So an example would be a relationship for a topic are the words you extract out here, like what's the symptom of diabetes? What causes heartburn? What are the hours for the restaurant? And then we want to be able to parse out of that what we use as an expression of article, but it could, some people call that the fact, but it's the short snippet of content or piece of information, voice optimized, that you want to deliver into that topic and relationship. So it's quite a bit more sophisticated than this, because what you end up managing is all the possible relationships, all the possible topics, and you use what's called a knowledge graph and generate what's called a knowledge graph to generate these relationships. So in our platform, knowledge graph is front and center for how we manage a question answering framework, but it also can be used for resource lookup and other types of content-based experiences. A resource lookup might be, for example, find me a dermatologist that's within 2 miles of my location. So
hey,
these
Nate.
are variations. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I checked with a couple other folks on this end, and it appears that the slide hasn't advanced since the delivery and facility nursing assistant on multiple screens here. I don't know if that's the experience that everyone's having, but
well, thank you for making me aware of that. Can you confirm that you're seeing the voices different slide now?
Yeah. A lot of people are saying the same thing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Any better?
yeah, not yet. I think it may be a focus issue.
Yep, and apologies, folks. We'll get this back on track. I had this issue with this particular service in the past. Sometimes you have to kind of toggle out and toggle back in.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. How's that? See it now? So I should say voice is different.
Yes, we're good.
All right, let me catch you up, guys. I talked to this slide. I'm going to go through these 3 different points. I was highlighting the difference between knowledge and content. So this, I was talking to this slide. So the left side of the slide is that web page for the Mayo Clinic content. The right side is that same content developed into a conversational agent. So you can see there it is quite different. And then I talked about question answering. In order to support question answering, we have to have this concept of a knowledge base. So a knowledge base is a structure for managing a set of questions and answers, and they may be derived from query logs, patient service requests, FAQs, etc. They may be extracted using language processing techniques, NLP, but typically that it's some combination of that and human oversight. So this is what I was showing, the screenshot that talks about the concept of a topic, relationship, and article. In this case, a knowledge base takes advantage of a technology called a knowledge graph to manage these relationships. And a knowledge graph generally is constructed from a triple of relationships: a topic, a relationship, and an article. So a topic, like in this example, is diabetes heartbeat restaurant. A relationship are essentially these words that connect the topic with some information, like a piece of content. So it ends up looking like this. I'll let you guys soak this in. So in this example, if we wanted to know the symptoms of diabetes, we want to be able to parse that question to understand the topic and the relationship they're trying to mine in order to extract out the relevant answer. So you might ask the question, what if it's ambiguous? They might say, what are some of the symptoms? And we need to know that the context is diabetes. So that's where the conversational aspects come in, which is the next topic. So there is a difference between conversation and navigation. In a traditional content management world, you would think about those content objects or assets that you want to make manifest on your website or your digital app. It is quite different, even though maybe visually these look like the same sort of flow charts. It's quite different. On the left is just a navigation view for a website. On the right is a conversational flow modeling interface. This actually is the Orbita interface. I'll give you a quick glimpse of what that looks like in a second in a different view. So when you're designing a voice experience, you're designing your content in the context of a conversation. So the emphasis here is being able to attach to every step in that conversation the right piece of content, the right call out to a knowledge graph in the examples I was given before. I'm going to jump to the last little piece here, voice versus text. So this may be the most obvious thing, but it's worth spending some time on. When we're talking about a voice interface, not just chatbot, but an actual voice interface, speech synthesis becomes a priority. SSML is the markup language for speech synthesis. And I'm going to show you a little glimpse into what that looks like. But what you want to be able to have some control over are the obvious things like the voice and pitch and gender of the speech synthesis. So Alexa by default is female or higher pitch sounding, but other voice synthesis options allow you to select different gender. You have to think about language, and in some places the dialect of language and maybe even accent. So if you've used Siri on your smartphone, your iPhone, you can select different options in those first two bullets. Accent could be Australian, could be UK English, but it's all English. The other one that is less recognized is something called prosody, which is just a fancy way of saying tone, inflection, stress, and rhythm. You can lengthen how certain words are spoken in voice application for the elder. It's not uncommon to want to slow down the speech. You can actually control the length of how certain words and phrases are expressed, and you can control the overall rate of speech using techniques in SSML. And then in healthcare in particular, pronunciation of certain words, obscure drug names or conditions or symptoms. At Orbita, we've spent a bit of time trying to build into our platform particular requirements for handling the unique words and phrases that exist in healthcare. The other consideration for voice versus text, I alluded to before, is the length of your piece of content, its actual duration. You're not going to read 2 pages of text out of an Alexa skill, so you need to think about how to parse it down into something that is reasonably consumable through a voice experience. Also, empathy, sort of an underappreciated thing in healthcare, is not just how things are said, but what's being said. So empathy is manifest in the form of a virtual assistant that can say, I'm sorry you're not feeling well, or I understand that you're in pain. That exactly what's being said and how you design the user experience to factor in somewhat more of the human element. Like I said before, when we've rolled these out, we have actual end users who have said things like, I know she's a robot, but I think she's a person. They won't think she's a person if she speaks in a stiff, robotic way. So having empathy built into the experience and into the content is important. And then lastly, context, which is just a way of thinking about how to personalize the experience while remembering the context. You can do little things like say, hello, Jake, don't forget to take your Coumadin this morning. Knowing that in the context of this user experience, we're dealing with an actual human, and we want to make sure that we're personalizing the experience. So I'm going to jump to a quick example online, and I want to make sure this is showing. It looks like it is. Jake, or you can confirm that you're seeing my browser interface.
Yes.
Got it. So what you see here, thank you, is a flow designer. And the flow designer is basically a tool in the Orbita platform that allows you to design and deploy conversational experiences. You can deploy them to a chatbot, you can deploy them to an Alexa skill, Google Assistant, even an IBR. But what the common theme here is that it's conversational, and the content needs to reflect the peculiar digital endpoint, in this case, voice. So what you'll see here, and this is just a quick glimpse into our content editor. This is a voice-first editor, and among other things, it allows you to do things like, well, it's a WYSIWYG editor, so I can just start typing, and we can play back and just listen to how the voice synthesis will handle this particular rendering. So I'm just going to hit the play button.
I can find providers by location, by name, by specialty, or by language.
So in this example, we have little pauses that are put in there. That's what those little hourglasses are. You can actually look at the source for this. It's just like a web page. You can kind of go in and see what the actual source is in there. You'll see a little break tag in there. So I don't want to get too deep into the code, but I want to point out that much like you are designing the content for a website, you can have control by using SSML and other techniques. I will point out one other among all the different features in here, which include being able to control how you want certain ambiguous words to be pronounced. So weighting, the words like weight and other have different emphasis depending on how you treat it as a verb or a noun. So you can, words that are semantically ambiguous, you can put some control in there on how you want that word to be expressed. And so all these are corresponding little tags that are available. You can also change the rate of speed. You can have it be slow, medium, super fast. You can have it be louder, so you can have a certain word emphasized. You can have the pitch be higher or lower. So all of these are options that allow you to control this concept of prosody, which is tone, inflection, strength and stress, etc. Another neat feature here is that you can change certain words in here. Suppose you wanted at a macro level to say, when I see the word provider, I want to say doctors, right? So what it'll do is it'll put a little replacement token in there where you can say for that particular word, we just don't like the way it says provider, or in the context of this particular application, we don't like it. And so we can have it.
I can find doctors by location.
It'll keep provider in there, but it has a little flag to indicate that when it sees the word provider, it's going to substitute in a different word. So all these there's a whole slew of other techniques. You can even insert an audio, an actual live or real audio files. If you don't want it to be speech synthesis, you can have a professional voiceover, insert that in. So there's a whole slew of other things. One thing I'll point out in our platform, because we say voice first but not voice only, we also want to have the flexibility of having a textual variation. So we might say that for a chatbot, we don't want just voice, but we want a text input. So it can be both voice and text. And we might even have a screen option where we can do a full HTML editor. It gives us considerable control. So anyway, what we want to think about when we're dealing with content in a voice-first world is that we want control over the voice experience, but we don't want to necessarily limit how we deploy that content for voice. Before I wrap up, just a couple quick things I wanted to show. This is the Orbita, or a very quick glimpse into the Orbita Answers interface. So in this case, we can complete a topic. A topic here is a complaint, and this is a call center example. So it should say we can create a new fact. So you can say a complaint has a relationship, which is a description. And what we want to be able to do is to manage the content that's associated with a complaint. And this is the framework to do it. You notice the UI is exactly the same. One thing that I will highlight here is that there's a little token in here which allows you to create a dynamic insert in here. So we can do a lookup into a piece of data that will insert a complaint phone number. We can also do things like, I'm sorry, Nate, but I understand you have a complaint, so we can personalize it by using those same sort of tokens. So this is where we get to context and where we get into personalized experiences. All right. So let's see if I can successfully switch back to the PowerPoint. It looks like it's there. All right, so I'm pretty much wrapped up. We'll be happy to take questions at this point, but I want to just kind of summarize. There's a lot more to it, but really there are three things that you want to be thinking about when you're dealing with content in a voice-first world. Obviously, what I have on the screen here is a priority. You need to think voice first, but you also want to think conversation with a flow designer type of tool like I demonstrated. You also want to think in terms of knowledge versus content. So building a knowledge graph that can tap into your content is a priority. And so seek out tools and technologies and techniques for being able to take existing content and build a knowledge graph. So those are, I would say, the three priorities. Just to wrap up, some resources. You can learn more about voice-first experiences generally. We have a whole slew of webinars up on the Orbita.ai website. You can also contact Orbita and the Connective DX team using the links there. And then encourage you to check us out on the various social channels. The Twitter handles are available for both companies down at the bottom here. Any other questions? Happy to handle them at this point. I will highlight that there are some events coming up that both Connective DX and Orbita are presenting and represented at. One going on right now in Nashville is SHISHMED. I think Connected DX is going to have a representation there. So let's jump to questions.
Yes, thanks again, Nate. So the first question is, how do you address HIPAA compliance in your digital in-room patient assistant conversations with providers?
Yeah, well, in that particular example, first I'll point out that that was with our partner Deloitte, and that was in Australia. So the first instances of it are in Australia, which has different regulatory requirements related to voice-first applications in a clinical setting. In the US, there are two ways of dealing with it. One is using a device that full stack is HIPAA compliant. And right now, as we are recording this particular webinar, The only device that is HIPAA eligible, or the only platform that's HIPAA eligible, is Alexa. And right now they are not supporting an Echo deployment in facility just yet. It's something that they have expressed interest in supporting in the coming year, but they haven't formalized that yet. I'll want to be full disclosure, I don't represent Amazon in any capacity, so this is just what they've said publicly. So you can deploy HIPAA eligible, HIPAA compliant applications using custom devices, smart tablets, smartphones that can be deployed. Where it gets tricky is when you have a smart speaker, always on, always listening. You have to be sensitive to shared settings, and different organizations outside of HIPAA have different requirements. This is very much an emerging area. We have 3 or 4 pilots that are in progress right now. And if the person asking the question is interested in learning more, I'd be happy to tell them what we're working on. But that's sort of the current state of the art for HIPAA eligible applications inside clinical settings.
Excellent. This next one's a bit long. Can you describe the functional scope of your platform in general terms and highlight the other systems or components a hospital might need to implement an end-to-end solution for patient care before or after in-person interactions?
Before, after, yeah, so the full care journey. So what Orbita provides, we're I would say the best way to think about it in the context of that question is we're an enabling technology that fits within the scope of a larger patient care experience, care management experience. And in fact, we do have partners in the space that embed our technology inside solutions they're taking to market, big digital health companies. But with respect to the full population health care management journey, the typical components that you require are an experience for the patient that will allow them to communicate their needs and track their progress against a care program pre-clinical visit, clinical episode, and post-clinical episode. And then an experience for a clinician or a care provider to track the activity of the patient through that. Where we sit in that equation is the actual end user experience powered through voice. We power that. What we do also is we integrate with the systems of record for tracking the data that that patient is recording through the experiences that we build. So an Alexa device in the home that's used to allow them to track their wellness against a care plan. We capture that data and we can write it to an EMR or read from an EMR that, in a way that informs the user experience. So we're the HIPAA eligible application that sits in the middle. What we need in order for the full experience to operate is the backend system for the clinicians who are tracking that patient, and we have partners who provide that experience. We also have some tooling of our own, and then the system of record that stores the data for the patient, the EMR. So we provide points of integration for both of those solutions. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And one last question. Earlier you mentioned content strategy and experienced professionals who own the voice experience. Are there other roles that interact with your platform within the organization? Who owns tech integration and ongoing maintenance of the code?
Yeah, well, a good question, and thanks for asking it. I did talk about the experience managers or content managers, and you saw some of the tooling that we offer that is designed for non-technical people. We call it low code or no code environments that allow you to manage that experience. So that's geared towards that first category of users, business users, for lack, for a more generic phrase. We also have an environment for developers, which allow them to use a low code and APIs to actually manage interfacing with backend systems and other, in some cases, other devices even. So we can take data from a connected health scale, for example, that would inform the voice experience. And I didn't show that tooling, but that's an entire development framework unto itself. Depending on our partner, our client who we're working with, they may have their own resources that can be trained on how to use our tooling, developer resource, as well as business managers, or they may seek our help or help of a partner like Connective DX, who has the skills and resources and been trained on this technology to do the work themselves. So those are the models. We have plenty of customers who are fine being trained on our platform and want to be taught to fish, not to have somebody fish on their behalf. So we provide training for all that, enabling their resources to get comfortable with how to deploy applications on our platform.
Excellent. Thanks, Nate, and thanks to everyone who joined us. And on a parting note, thanks for your patience with the technical difficulties we had with the production of this webinar. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to contact me directly. My name is Jake Damari. I'm the Director of Marketing at Connective DX, and I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience that this may have caused you. It was a mistake we made with the database on our behalf as the hosts of the webinar, and I hope it didn't reflect poorly at all on the content of the webinar. So thank you, and have a great afternoon.